started. We can go ahead and call the meeting to order and go ahead and do a roll call.
Do you want me to do the roll call?
Who is that?
Lynn.
Yes, Lynn. Thank you.
You bet.
That-
Okay. David Nigro.
Present.
Diane Douglas.
Proxy Mike Manley, so she's present by proxy.
William Gibney. Michael Gordon.
Present.
Dean Howard.
Here.
Mark Sims.
Present.
Sue K. Kneifel.
Here.
Shelley Herbold. Lynn Davison is here.
Well, thank you, everybody. That means we have 7 board members, which is a quorum. I appreciate everybody's effort in the dog days of July. Okay, item number 1.02, information item, a student presentation, summer transition camp. Assistant Superintendent Rex.
Good afternoon, President Sims, Board, and Superintendent Reichman. I'm going to bring up one of the board directors, Jonas Camp, and he will be showing you a video that tells you all about our summer transition camp, and then he'll give you a few words following the video.
Did somebody join the call?
Bill Gibney did.
Okay, Bill, welcome.
Good.
And-
great.
And now Jonas has a few things to add.
Hello, good evening, Board President Mark Sims, Kristen Rex, and Annette Reichman. My name is Jonas Camp, and I have worked here at ASDB for the past 10 years in a variety of positions. Most recently, was the residential coordinator for the summer transition camp. The transition camp occurred last month in June. Jennifer Hensley was the director for deaf programs, who's not unable to attend here tonight, so she's asked me to speak on her behalf. So I'm happy to share with you our experiences. This was such a great experience for the kids and for the staff. We had such a wonderful time. As you see in the video, there were smiles nonstop. Everyone smiled the entire time. We had such a good time. The students were able to learn different skills like resume building, career applications, all the different things that they'll need to know for their futures. They took advantage of the opportunities during this camp, and it was an accessible camp where we were able to directly communicate with our campers. After the 2 weeks of learning, they were able to learn about different careers, and we also had different activities like I'm sure that you guys experience hobbies of yours after work, so we want to give them that taste of what to do after work, the fun side of being an adult. So we went rock climbing, we went to a baseball game, we went swimming. We had so many different activities we involved them in. We went to the gym to play basketball every night, so many different activities. One of my favorite games, as you can see, there was a game that had cups and rubber bands and strings. The goal of that activity was to place all the cups using just the rubber band and the strings to make a pyramid. And this was such a great team building activity. It allowed the students to communicate with each other, and they learned so much about the ability to have patience. All the campers have already told me that they can't wait to come back next year. So they're all looking forward to it, and they can't wait. So we have been working together, Jennifer Hensley and I and other staff members have been working on how we can recruit more students next year. This is such an awesome opportunity for all our students here in the state of Arizona. One thing we did change for our following year is the name of the camp. Currently it stands as the Transition Camp, but we decided to change that name to a more attractive name called Camp LEAP. Leadership, exploration, advocacy, and play. So of course we have to have the play in order to enhance the experience and for the kids to actually want to come and join the camp. So thanks again, board, and thanks to everyone for listening to our experiences at the camp. And if you have any more questions, or if you want to know more about it, please feel free to contact me or Dr. Jennifer Hensley. We'll be more than happy to share our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is call to the public for agendized items. There are no comments from the public. Next is information and discussion executive team reports. We'll start with business services. Is this separate from the other item? Yeah, okay, Richard.
Board President Sims, Superintendent Reichman, Dr. Rex, and members of the board. You have before you my report for this July, and it revolves around the trust funds. And if you've read it or if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. If you have any questions related to this topic. As Dr. Sims mentioned, I will be talking later on the budget issues.
Thank you very much. Any questions regarding it?
Okay.
The one thing I would say, Richard, in terms of the trust funds, the original origins of the funds would be something that would be worthwhile the board knowing.
Okay.
Because there have been multiple trusts, I believe, that have been set up for the benefit of the agency. Is that correct?
This is a single fund. It's broken into two parts. The largest part of it is where annually we draw 4% of it, 4 to 6% of it, and it's in the committee that Dr. Rex, members of the schools and the co-ops participate in, as well as Jennifer Hensley and the person that works with the children that are visually impaired. Is about $120,000 a year. I think I pointed that out. There's a much smaller fund that's called a scholarship fund, and we don't always distribute funds from that. Now, what makes up the trust fund, there's a lot of other funds that aren't really trust funds. They're funds that are donated to the school for specific purposes.
Do you know the historical origin of the trust funds?
I know that it's generated with a gift from a single donor,
Right.
and I can get more detail for you on the next meeting if you'd
Right.
like.
'Cause
Yeah,
I
and go ahead.
I believe he was a blind student who helped run one of the medical centers in the Tucson area, but I don't remember, and was alive up until recently. I'm not sure if he is anymore.
I believe there was an opportunity recently for some people to meet with him, so possibly. So anyway, Dr. Rex, Superintendent Reichman.
Yeah, I met Berger, his last name at Berger, for lunch, and then his wife, about 6 months ago. And he shared with me that he started this trust fund for ASDB back in the 1990s.
Yeah, so historically there have been some questions about the intent of the trust in terms of what the monies were intended to do. And so that would be something, if we still have the opportunity to get at. There was historically an issue that at one point the trust funds were used for physical plant issues. Henry Garcia used to talk about that at the meetings. And so when I first came on the board, I met with that committee on the trust funds, and it wasn't clear what the intent of the trust was. And I'm not questioning how we're using the funds, but it would be good to get clarification from the originator of the trust as to what the goal of those funds were, to make sure that we're consistent. I mean, it might not be in the documents, but it would be nice to know what those were, because I think, if not for us, but for the community to understand what it was, because there has been some tension in the past about where those funds were going and how they were distributed.
And there should be a document that identifies the purpose.
I think it's ambiguous.
Say
but
that.
I believe it's not clear.
Okay.
So I think that's one of the issues. If you talk to the investment advisor, he
Yep.
might be able to tell you further. But my point to you is if we can get clarification for the agency's sake, that it can be codified in some sort of form, so we have something to refer back to. I mean, it's pretty far down on the pecking order compared to the other types of issues we had to deal with in the past, but I think that this is something that could be a potential that we would need clarification going forward.
We'll have it for the next meeting.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next is Anita on Human Resources.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Dr. Rex. In your board packet, I've provided a copy of the HR report. I'd like to take a minute to highlight a couple of items. We've been busy working on the beginning of year stuff for our staff to come back in August, preparing, updating our handbook, our onboarding process, as well as looking at our annualized trainings that we offer. In addition, we are very excited to hold our first annual leadership conference next week at the Phoenix Day School campus on Wednesday, July 19th, for all our superheroes that lead our organization. At this time, I'd like to make myself available for any questions that you may have.
Trying to get to the number of positions. many teacher positions do you anticipate having open at the start of the school year?
Currently, on the listing that I gave you, which is as of 6/29, we have 20. However, we are in the process of, not we, but the hiring managers are in the process of interviewing to close those positions, and we're processing paperwork daily to fill those.
So the next time you create this chart, can you put the, how long the vacancy has been open?
Sure.
Because I think that, and sort it in order of longest to open to shortest. So we can see at the top of the list what's been open for the longest.
Okay.
That'd be very helpful. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul, Information Technology. Why aren't you on the cloud?
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. I've provided a copy of my board report in your board packets. There hasn't been much change to my last reports for the simple reason that there's been a lot of work that we've been working on to prepare for the new school year, so a lot of it's general maintenance and preparation and closing out of projects at this time. I'd like to make myself available if you have any questions that I can answer.
Any questions? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is instructional update. Dr. Rex.
Good afternoon. As you can see, the kids might have gone home and some of the teachers have gone home, but there's definitely a lot going on our campuses. We have a lot of summer opportunities, and we have had the opportunity for some professional learning opportunities as well. I'd like to call the board's attention to an update from the Southeast Regional Cooperative given to me by Director Paya Benson. We had a student, Sierra Peterson, who had the opportunity of competing in the 17th Annual Braille Challenge. It was her third time representing Arizona. She did very well, starting off against about 1,100 kids and then wheedled down to about 10. And she had the opportunity to do quite well and represent the greater Tucson area at the University of Southern California a couple weeks back. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to field those at this time.
Any questions for Dr. Rex? Can you describe the Braille Challenge in brief, what they do?
Yes, I have actually have a little bit on that. Absolutely. The competition basically gauges proficiency in reading and writing Braille through a variety of tests. They include things like proofreading, understanding charts and graphs, describing audio, and demonstrating reading comprehension according to the student. That's what she competed in.
Thank you. Next is Public Media and Relations by Ryan.
All right. Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Assistant Superintendent Rex. I presented my board report into your packets, and before I'll entertain some questions, I want to highlight a couple things. First of all, for the Arizona Braille Challenge, Sierra Peterson, just to clarify, she got second place in her division on the national level. So that's, in the past, she's done quite well as well in prior competitions. For another thing I want to highlight was last board meeting, you requested that we set up a public interface for the public to leave comments and feedback. That's been accomplished now. At the top of our website, we do have a feedback portal link. Once you guys have an opportunity to review that, let me know if that meets your needs, and if it does, I will make that available to the public and let them know about their opportunity to leave feedback. In addition to that, summer's usually a slower time overall for our area. As you can imagine, not many school events, although certainly we covered, the summer transition camp. However, having said that, we had a great year in review with the team. We track a lot of metrics. We're very data-driven in our division, and probably the most significant thing that I can share with you is a year ago, before social media started being a focus, we only had 7,500 impressions. This year, we increased that by almost 6,000% to 500,000 impressions. So we're really getting the word out in a huge way, and so I just want to highlight that importance.
So we'll see 6,000% again next year.
That's a pretty daunting task, but if you tell my team to do it, they'll try their hardest, let me tell you. Anyway, at this time, I'd like to entertain any questions the board may have.
That's great. Congratulations. Any other questions for? Thank you. Operations, Terry?
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Dr. Rex. Before you have my board report, I'd like to highlight a couple of things. Facilities, transportation, and food service all supported all the transition camps and summer schools. They did a really good job. Also, I just got word today from construction services that they're going to be giving us another, $300,000 for this year to replace old and aging HVAC for both campuses.
So in terms of scale, like what does that mean? Like what's our need versus what does that mean?
It does not meet all of our needs. But the last couple of years, we've got a list that we have been whittling down. So we're looking right now at what's the biggest bang for our buck.
So, but does 300,000 take care of 25% of your outstanding issues, 50%? I mean, I'm not trying to. We're not going to hold you in the court of law to this.
We're looking at probably 6 to 7 units, depending on the size, dictates the price as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agency report, Superintendent Reichman.
President Sims, members of the board, and Assistant Superintendent Rex. I'm happy to inform you that during the month of June, I took 2 weeks off on vacation.
Yay.
That said, I wanted to go back to the board retreat. I did take notes, and then I put that in as my report to you. And I want to go back to that a little bit. During the board retreat, I shared with you that we were starting the strategic planning process, that we were just beginning to have a conversation inside the agency about what we want to do with the strategic planning. We've identified 3 areas we call domains, specifically building leadership capacity, building learning capacity, and building resource capacities. And looking at that, underneath those 3 capacities that we want to build, we do have 3 goals. They're very broadly defined, but the leadership goal is really to improve the effectiveness of governance and leadership within the agency. The learning capacity really is to develop and set high expectations for our curriculum, instruction, and assessment. The resource capacity, of course, is to develop and create the resources available to support the first 2 domains. Although we haven't yet really spelled out what we want to do under each, we are already starting to do some activities. For example, yesterday and today, we had what we called the Leadership Academy. Yesterday for the executive team, and today for Kristen's group, the principals and the regional directors, really trying to get at what leadership skills do we need to have to be able to move this agency forward, and how do we work together collaboratively. And that goes back to the operating principle. How do we embed that, the accountability piece? the collaboration piece and the transparency piece. So we are starting to move, and I want to give you the opportunity to participate and discuss that when you're ready to do that, because we need to move on this. We really need to start thinking about and figuring out. The one thing that became more clear to me yesterday is that my limited understanding of the strategic planning is because as an agency, we have some fundamentals that are not in place yet. And before we can really do effective strategic planning, we have to get those fundamentals in place. And this is where our consultant, Nancy Alexander, is really very helpful and supportive, because she's identifying some of those fundamentals and what we need to do to get them in place and then really do the strategic planning. So that was a part that was missing for me before that I'm just now starting to grasp. So I just wanted to share that with you. And that said, part of the retreat discussion was on the board role. And I would like to follow up with you on that. Again, I'm beginning to understand that the board has focused on personnel issues since 2012. And so it's now kind of time for us to sort of regroup and think about, okay, what is that the board needs to do to work with the agency that has accountability, the collaboration, and the transparency piece. And I need your thoughts on that. How do we do that? I do think that maybe the next retreat, since the last one seemed to be very successful, we can bring in someone to talk about the board role and responsibility. We also have an ASDB policy that defines the board role and responsibilities. Maybe it's time to go back and revisit it. And maybe we can do that in January when we have new board members coming on board as part of their orientation, but we do it collectively. Just for your thought here. The second piece here is you asked for information about the budget. We are starting that presentation this afternoon, already getting some feedback. We're already beginning to understand, okay, even we need to be more mindful about how we provide this information to you, the board, in a way that's clear and transparent. Hopefully today starts that discussion, but we are making the effort to follow up and respond to your questions and the need to understand the overall framework of how our budget works, what's our revenue and what's our expenditures, and what's our relationship with the state, specifically state funding. And Richard will be providing that information a little bit later. So that's my report to you.
So I have a question and then a comment. So what are the fundamentals that are missing?
And I'm not fully aware yet myself, but one example is maybe formulating a communication plan. That the agency needs to have a clear internal communication plan. Another piece would be having an assessment plan.
Okay.
So we are assessing our students, but are we doing it consistently throughout the agency? Are we using the assessment results to inform our instruction? So it may be that we need to develop an assessment plan. Those are some of the pieces that are starting to come up as fundamentals that other school districts already have in place, and they're not here yet. So we're having to take a few steps back and figure out what the foundations are and what we need to have in place.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments for Superintendent Reichman?
Mrs. Gordon? Annette, you mentioned the leadership seminars that went on, I guess, yesterday and today?
Mhm.
And there's another one coming up on the 19th. How many people participated in each group?
Yesterday, there was the executive team, so 7 of us, right? And today, with the principals and directors,
Minus 2, almost 8, 17.
17. And actually, today, when we talk about the principals and the regional directors and the directors at deaf programs, blind programs, these folks are the heart of the agency. They drive the education piece. So this group today, from my point of view, is probably the most critical group in terms of supporting and developing and giving them the resources they need to do their jobs effectively and to provide leadership to the schools and to the regional centers that we have.
What's the follow-up from today's and yesterday's workshops?
I think I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Rex.
Actually, we have a timeline where we'll be meeting. I think our next meeting is in September. It's ongoing, and by May, we have some goals set to have things in place. A lot of the pieces that Superintendent Reichman alluded to are part of that advanced ed process. So we're taking the advanced ed process with our strategic plan and then putting kind of, like she said, that heart, the center group that's going to help support our teachers, support our students together and have an aligned plan, which will be really nice. It's
Okay.
way easier to operate the ship when you have a plan and all the things are lining up.
And the superheroes conference, or how many people will probably participate in that?
Ooh, I'm going to defer to Anita real quick.
That would be about 70 employees from around the state. That includes all of the executive team, the principals, regional directors, and all of their supervisors and managers.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Do you mind if I pipe up real quick and ask a quick question? Superintendent Reichman mentioned the need for possibly helping educate the board on what the roles are. As a board of directors, I know that we function somewhat uniquely as a governing board for a statewide system. I know that there are some very robust outside training specifically for governing boards. I think that may, looking into having a group come in and help not just review the policies that we have in place, but also looking at best practices for other governing boards on very efficient and effective, not just school districts, but other entities similar to this, might be a good way to get consensus on what the role of this board is and how we might go about more effectively helping the superintendent guide the ship in the direction that we want it to go in. I think that you had mentioned that for a future retreat, but we might want to explore trainings for board members on how we might go about making this board a more effective entity.
I'm detecting somebody volunteering. We'll get to that at the end of the meeting. Next item, 2.01, consent agenda items. Approval of consent agenda consistent with board policy to include 4.01, 6.04, and 6.05.
I'll make a motion to accept, I'm sorry, I don't have anything in front of me here.
4.01, 6.04, and 6.05.
We don't have our tablets today. So,
Do we have a second?
I'm sorry.
This is Lynn, I second.
Okay. Just a quick comment. On 4.01, that is an approval for the students to travel, and the board needs to approve travel. That is not necessarily approval of the funding, it's just
Right.
an approval of the travel. Okay.
Thank you, yes.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the item passes. Item 3.01, the budget presentation by Richard. I'd just like to make a comment that, you know, there was discussion about the board meeting and the budget, and it is true that the board needs to understand the finances better, but it isn't just the board. It's the entire community and the stakeholders. A large part of the tensions that have occurred historically within this agency is because there was not transparency as to where the funds were going more than where they were coming from, but you really can't understand why and where they go until you understand from where they come and to what they are actually designated for. So the goal is not just for the board to better understand it, the goal is for all the stakeholders and all of the constituency of this agency to be able to go and find this information. So one of the things is I very much appreciate Richard always says, well, you can find it, and that's true, but you can't find it easily. And you have to be a super sleuth to be able to go into these accounting systems on a statewide. So our goal is to take it out from those systems at Richard's efforts and to be able to present it to the board and to the community in a meaningful way and be able to answer questions. So this will be an evolving presentation where each presentation will likely bring up more questions, which will lead to another presentation. So we'll be finished when there are no more questions. That's really the process. When nobody's asking you any more questions, as long as they don't keep on asking a new question, the same question they already answered, then we're finished. But until that time, we will continue with this presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome. So, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Dr. Rex, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the ASDB budget this year. First, I want to apologize to each of you. A few of you were asking questions about the completeness of the PowerPoint presentation, and upon investigation, I discovered that the full report did not transfer to the PowerPoint slides. However, in working with the communications department, I provided them a PDF version of the document, which I understand you now have. As I understand it, this presentation will be the first over the next few meetings where we look at different areas of revenues, expenditures, and appropriations that help ASDB operate and guide us as we proceed. The first presentation is really an opportunity to give you a basic overview of ASDB's budget and identify major sources of revenues and appropriations. We will do this by looking at the document prepared by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. This is a document prepared annually for every agency in the state. They publish a book, and it's updated periodically to reflect changes in laws or increases in revenues and other factors. The numbers, this document actually really presents what I would call a continuation budget each year. We provide the information to the governor's office, who then makes it available to the JLBC, and a budget is passed, and this document then comes out of that. So, we're going to look at the document prepared by JLBC, and it's a very good overview of our revenues and expenditures and our appropriations. Although the PowerPoint did not transfer completely, this document really provides a good overview, so please refer to it as I continue. And I understand is it available? Is it on the screen for anybody else to see? Nick? Nope. Okay, so only print, okay, so I guess the only way you can be looking at it is you have a print copy. I first want to apologize because some of you I know have already seen this document and understand it, and the presentation is going to be basic. Accordingly, it may seem redundant, so just bear with us as we move forward. After I've covered the document, I will of course answer any questions you have. First, as you can see, the document provides information for 3 years. Fiscal year 2016, and when we say fiscal year, we're talking about the year ending June 30th. That's the fiscal school year. Though the expenditures recorded there are actual expenditures. Next is fiscal year 2017, which is an estimate. That's the year that ended just this past June. Okay, and then the approved budget for the year we're in now, fiscal year 2018. The document provides actual numbers for 16, estimates for 17, and budget amounts for 18. The amounts reflected for 18 are what we believe we can spend this year. What's been approved for us to spend, what's been appropriated for us to spend. And I'll go into that a little further. If you look at the document, you'll know that the next section of the document is what's called program budgets. And under this heading, there are listed administration statewide, Phoenix Day School for the Deaf, preschool and outreach programs, regional cooperatives, and the Tucson campus. Each of these areas represents a program appropriation. When we spend dollars from each of these areas, we cannot spend more than what is indicated. However, we can ask for a transfer, so there is some flexibility. For example, this year we transferred money from the cooperative appropriation into the Tucson budget to cover a shortage there. The cooperative appropriation wasn't needed for that purpose. We are allowed to make those transfers and requests. Note that the next major category is the operating budget. Please note that this only represents that portion of the budget that is appropriated. Generally, this is everything except the cooperatives. In other words, the budgets for the cooperatives are not appropriated, and I'll discuss that later. The operating budget of the cooperatives is presented later on in the document, and it's just listed as a single amount, to some extent based on the revenue we're estimated to collect for the year. So the first major category, the program budget, discussed the expenditures that can be incurred. The operating budget generally breaks it down by the types of expenditures, but can also reflect special line items, which for ASDB accounts for 2 special line items: school bus replacement and a voucher fund adjustment. And that voucher fund adjustment is really just an estimate by JLBC of the impact, for example, Prop 123 will have on us each year, plus an adjustment to reflect our either increase or decrease in vouchered students. So they net that out, and then they identify an amount, and we can place that anywhere that we deem it necessary at the appropriate time. So I want to go over some of the operating budget categories. You'll notice that the first is full-time equivalent positions. That's the number of positions that we're allowed to have filled from appropriated funds, 541.2. That's full-time FTEs. Now, you're saying, but I thought we had 900 employees total. That's because we can hire people from non-appropriated funds. The cooperatives have a number of people that work for them, and we can fund people out of those. So the 541.2 are just the people that are paid from appropriated funds. The next line item is personal services. It's $17,504,500. That's roughly 52% of our total expenditures. So typically when people say, well, how does ASDB use their dollars? I say the majority of it's used in personal services and ERE. ERE stands for employee-related. That's FICA, health insurance, other benefits. Those 2 categories out of the appropriated funds account for about 78 to 80% of our total expenditures. The rest of the line items that you see there, professional and outside services, in-state and out-of-state travel, food and other operating expenditures make up the remaining 20% or so of our appropriation. And then there are the 2 line items that I spoke about. School bus replacement. So for the last, I would say 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, they've been giving us $738,000 a year to replace our school buses. And then the voucher fund adjustment. So you can note that the agency total appropriation of $33,911,500 agrees with the agency totals under the program budget. It's really two ways of looking at the same information. It is again important to note that this only represents our appropriated funds. The third major breakdown is fund sources, and this provides an understanding of how the costs identified in the first two categories above will be provided for. The first source of funding is from a state appropriation. This is actually an appropriation that the legislature decides that in order to keep our schools running at the levels that we've identified, they need to give us state funds of approximately $21,932,000. An additional $11,878,700 will come from the Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Fund. The primary funding for the Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Fund is the institutional voucher, okay? And it includes, to a lesser extent, revenue from the land trust, which in 2016 was about $227,393, and in 2017 we expect to receive $256,000, a little more. That only represents about 2% of the total dollars we receive. Of the original 100,000 acres, we still have 82,557 remaining. The revenue and what have you that was generated from the sale or disposition of the other acreage is what goes into the investment pool that the treasurer also uses to distribute earnings to us from. You'll note that there's a footnote next to the Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Fund. And the note basically says, before any expenditure of any Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Fund monies occur in excess of $11,878,700, the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind shall report to the JLBC the intended use of the monies. Basically what that's saying is that if we collect more than they appropriated, or if we have a carryover balance, which has happened, and we need to use that, and so we're going to spend more in a particular year, since these funds are appropriated, we need to just inform them of the intended use, and they'll approve it. And we've done that before. So when there's a balance in the funds, and in a particular year, a balance is carried over, and we did use that to continue to fund something that's a position or an activity, we can notify the GLBC, and they'll increase our appropriation appropriately. Finally, please note that the last two items listed on the page, the other non-appropriated funds of $15,859,300 and the federal funds of $2,079,000. These funds, again, are not appropriated, but generally the $15,859,300 represents the voucher that we get for children that are served by our co-op, plus fee-for-service dollars. The fee-for-service dollars typically are less than $3 million a year. The remainder is collection on the institutional voucher for kids that we serve through our co-ops. Generally, their expenditures mirror the same pattern as the expenditures in our appropriated funds. 80% or more of their costs are associated with personal services and ERE. It's actually a little higher. The rest of the dollars represent, the federal dollars represent Title I, Special Ed, Medicaid, RSA-VR, and those are the types of federal dollars we get. And many times we use those, for example, for some of the summer programs and what have you. You can use Title I dollars. And other dollars we get that are not necessarily appropriated. And that's my initial report on where our money comes from and where it goes in a very, very broad sense. Can I answer questions? And I'm sure there will be some.
So Richard, The top is what you tell the state where we're spending the money, correct?
Say that again now?
The top part is what is transmitted between you and the state.
That's correct.
Because what I see here is we should be doing cartwheels because we have a $15 million surplus.
No.
That's the whole point. So you don't have the total expenditures on here. In other words, this is what is a transfer of information document between you and the state, not necessarily what the agency actually spends.
I understand what you're saying, absolutely. But I can tell you that the cooperative fund expenditures are 15 million, but they're not shown because the legislature doesn't appropriate those expenditures. I understand what you're saying, absolutely.
So this is more of a language between you and other parts of the state as compared to if I said to you,
Sure.
what's your P&L or what's your costs? And
This is
right.
not our P&L.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we need to understand.
Okay.
So can I ask, so this is information that we get directly from the JLBC?
We get, yes, it's available publicly.
Right.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
this doesn't talk about the internal mechanisms for like our co-ops and what those expenses are and
Well,
their
the-
areas and things along those
Not on
lines.
this document, but the information for that comes directly from the state's accounting system. Most state agencies have converted to the new AFIS system, Arizona Financial Information System. And our structure is such that we're broken down into program units, basically, and that information is, available through that. This is what we report to them as our expenditure for the year, what we're required to report to them. And they want to identify all of our funds, but they're not going to appropriate things like our federal funds or cooperatives.
So the thing is basically the state says we don't really care if districts give you money to provide services.
Oh, they care.
No, but that's not really stuff they want reported back and forth. They just want to know where their money is.
We have to report that to them. In fact, our budget is like all agencies, ADE, DES, Health Services, all of the access, all of their budgets are now linked to our web pages. Ours is set up on a link to our web page. You could look at our budget, and when the budget's prepared, it's typically prepared appropriated funds, other funds, and that's available. Again, I'm giving you the old, you can find it if you look for it, but we can actually make that available, but it basically is a very detailed document telling where each of the dollars are being spent.
This is Gordon. First of all, thank you, Richard. This is an interesting starting point, and obviously it is it's a document that expressly has a point of view coming from the legislature. I think as we go forward, though, and as you just mentioned, the detailed information that works through a typical revenue and expense line and the line items that are associated with cost centers, particularly as it might pertain to the populations and the different regional centers, the schools, the residential piece. Those are the things that I'm particularly interested in seeing and would like to actually be able to present to the board even for discussion in a special meeting or somehow how we can drill down, a lot. Because this is good, but when we see 2.162 in professional and outside services, that opens up a lot more questions and certainly any answers. That's the piece, I think, and when we talk about, and I appreciate the beginning of this whole dialogue, but when we talk about budget presentations over 4 meetings, which would bring us up through January, I guess, or so, or whenever, or maybe next March, actually, even. I think that there's some way that we need to kind of expedite this information sharing, and that's this. I don't know if this is really a question as much as, and not necessarily a question of you as much as to Dr. Sims and the board, is how do we get to that point where we can kind of expedite the process of really being, because by the time we're looking at these numbers, we'll be looking at next year's numbers. So that's the piece, I think, when we talk about fiscal fiscal awareness is, as a board, and particularly a board that we don't see these numbers very often. And certainly we see them in a context here that's not necessarily pragmatic towards what we wonder and want to know. Mark, you mentioned frequently that people will ask you about where does the money go, and as they do with me also. And so those are answers that we can never really give, and but I know we want to, because we've been here I think long enough that we want to have a feel for what's what. You know, there's 2 large campuses, all the regional areas, the day programs. That's the information that I think we want to look at and see how those cost centers break out and the effectiveness of the programming, or the effectiveness of those different areas, I should say.
Yeah, I would say ultimately, I don't know how many cost centers you have, but you would want to see all the cost centers, what they're all listed, and then you're going to want to start looking at each cost center across each program, right? So what's the cost center for Tucson, but then what's the cost center for Tucson for each school, and then for the residentials? You know, what are all those different costs? And then, you know, going across all of the different cooperatives and things like that. I mean, at some point, you can kind of look at expenditure per student. I mean, those are the types of things when you hear people talk about budgetary discussions on the state and on the board, on district level. Those are the types of things they talk about, you know, that Arizona spends 7,000 whatever per student, and other states spend this or something. So those are the types of things that when people, I mean, I don't know what the average is, but I mean, frankly, if you take the number of dollars we have and you divide it by the number of students, like most parents would be like, holy mother of Moses, I can't believe that what they get per student compared to what we do. Now we have to communicate to them effectively the need, but those are the types of metrics that people want us to be able to communicate in. So, and yeah, Mike, I appreciate your comment, and we'll talk about at the future meetings and stuff at the end of the agenda about potentially expediting this. So.
Mr. President?
Yes.
May I speak?
Please.
Richard, the next meeting, as I understand, the students in the co-op, we received the full voucher amount of them, but others fee-for-service basis. And I'd like to get some more information about that in terms of we do serve, how many of the do we get fee-for-service, and what the average amount for do we get the full voucher?
So the answer is that we have schools that participate in a program with us. We have a general requirement that in order to participate in the program, if the child is VI or HI only, we get the voucher. If the child is MD or MDSSI, they can be served on a fee-for-service basis. And those amounts vary depending on the severity of the activity. Now, generally on a voucher, we get about a little over, somewhere around $22,000, but there's a reduction because we give back a tuition to the school, because they still have to do some work in terms of education and what have you. I mean in terms of the academics. Sorry, I didn't mean. And then on the fee for service, it depends on the severity. That amount, it averages about $10,000 per kid. Or excuse me, I think the average is somewhere around 10,000, can be around 10,000 per child. And so in 2010, we served 54% of our kids got the voucher, and 46% of our kids were on a fee-for-service basis. In 2017, the year just passed, approximately 48% of our kids are on the voucher. So there's been a little bit of a flip-flop, and the rest of the kids are on fee-for-service. So the fee-for-service numbers have gone up, and the voucher numbers have dropped. And we've also have fewer kids now than we had in 2010. Now, the numbers that I'm giving to you are the most current numbers. They will change as we get into September and October, when the co-ops begin to see kids coming back. They've been evaluated and determined that they have an IEP that requires our services and what have you.
So just as a practical matter, I'm going to ask Leticia to email Mike all of the questions that were brought up here today, And then any other questions that board members are going to send them to Mike Gordon as well. And we're kind of covering the finance committee, but then he can prioritize the questions in terms of what he would like to get answered at the next session, because, you know, people have all these different questions and Mike can kind of prioritize it. So I'm not trying to jump on the agenda. We can skip it there, but that would be the way to work this. Any board member that has a question can email it to Mike, and then individually, so we're not having deliberation on email, and then Mike can look at them and prioritize them and then interact with Richard about what it is and, you know, how much time we have to do it. But I would agree with Mike's sentiment. And Dean, like, so for instance, you're going to have to re-email yours because we only got 2 out of every 3 words. So, any other questions? Even you saying okay, we only got 2 out of 3. So.
Wow.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Richard. It's a start of a process, and I appreciate your team doing the work to put that together. Okay. So I jump. Next is a consent agenda item. Oh, we did that. The action item: approval of superintendent's evaluation. So we did a Survey Monkey. The results are in the presentation. Any questions on the part of the board members regarding the evaluation or the results? Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
I had one question. So we have access to the information from the Survey Monkey. Is there a time when the board is going to be able to discuss the results with the superintendent and talk about?
Well, there are 2 times. There's now and another time. So I understand it's a little short notice. You just got it about a day and a half ago, so it's very hard. Yes, we will have another opportunity to discuss it further.
Sure. Understood. No, it's okay.
But maybe Superintendent Reichman, was there any insights you saw from the results? And it's okay, you don't have to either. Were there any insights you had or anything that you saw that it's okay if you do not?
Really, it seems that for the first year, I'm a little bit surprised that I was rated as highly as I was, because I'm still in the learning phase, and I really appreciate you recognizing that. At the same time, it's clear I have some work to do that's identified in the evaluation results.
They didn't ask us of whether or not it was okay for you to take 2 weeks vacation in June.
It was a grace period.
Okay, thank you. Next item, information item, policy revision committee report. David, is there anything to report? It's okay if there is not.
There's nothing to report. I looked at the policy proposed. We'll talk about them when they.
Okay, great. So going forward, what we'll do on the agenda is if you have something that needs to be reported outside of the policy changes, you let Leticia know, and then she'll put you on the agenda. Otherwise, you won't be on the agenda because we'll just assume it's in the in the updates in the policy. I'd say the same for the finance committee. Obviously, if there's something else to be reported, Mike, is there anything else to discuss regarding the finance subcommittee?
When is the next meeting?
No, there isn't one.
There's, well, we'll talk about that, but there's the next scheduled meeting is in September. I don't know the exact date, but it's in September. 13th, I'm hearing. And then the Ombudsman Subcommittee.
Mark, I'm working on that. I've had some personal issues that I've had to deal with, but I want to schedule a phone call with Sue Kay and put her in touch with this gentleman that we may want to consider to hire for some, and have Sue Kay talk to him about some diversity training for the deaf community. And so, Sue Kay, I'll be in touch with you about that.
Okay.
Right. So then I'm going to say also going forward, in terms of the agenda, if you have something to report, we'll put you on the agenda with Leticia. Okay?
And that's why I asked when the next meeting is, because I will want it to be on the agenda.
So consider that on the agenda next time, Leticia. Okay, next is, thank you everybody for their work. I know it's a lot to do all this extra stuff, but this is really what's going to, I think, move the agency and the board and the leadership team forward in covering the issues that we need to take care of. Next is 6.02, information item, introduction and possible discussion of policies as listed in the agenda. I'm not going to list them all.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, and Dr. Rex. You have before you the proposed policy revisions. I do want to note that the policies were posted to the website for public comment. No public comment was received, and at this time, I'm open for any questions.
Any questions or comments or discussion?
Ms. Murphy, David Macro. Can you explain the base for the proposed change 0250?
0250 is,
The
yes,
non-discrimination
non-discrimination, equal opportunity. Yes, sir. The basis for this policy change is that we have had several questions from staff and students in the past in regards to whether our non-discrimination equal employment opportunity policies specifically cover transgender and sexual orientation. ASBA, according to them, takes the position that these may be included under the classification of sex. However, we decided that it would be more inclusive, more welcoming of our students and our staff members as well as the public to specifically state that sexual orientation and gender identity is included, and that is the basis for this particular policy change.
Although I am somewhat skeptical about this position, are there other state agencies or state statutes that, non-discrimination statutes that include sexual orientation and gender identity in Arizona?
Certainly. So what I can point to is an executive order in 2003 from Governor Napolitano that specifically stated that there would not be discrimination in any hiring practices or in employment for specifically sexual orientation. To the best of my knowledge, that has not been overturned by any of the subsequent governors. However, it is important to note that that is only for employees of public agencies, doesn't necessarily include the students.
And that includes gender identity as well, that executive order?
Thank you for that follow-up question. No, it does not include gender identity. It strictly addresses sexual orientation, sir.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
6.03, information item, regulation ACR by Superintendent Wright.
Yeah, talking about the regulation that focused on transgender students. This regulation really is provided for your information. It's not requiring your approval. The policies that we provide to you require board approval. The regulation is what we do internally to implement the policy. And this is what we intend to do, and providing the supports necessary for our transgender students. That, as a superintendent, I can approve, but wanted to just make sure you knew about this.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Superintendent Reichman, this is David Negro. Have other residential schools for either the deaf or the blind adopted similar regulations?
I actually don't know. Maria?
Yes, this is Maria Murphy. Thank you, Board Member Nigro. I actually did do a survey of other Midwest and Western states. I surveyed about 18 different schools for the blind and the deaf. The only schools that do have policies specifically for students are the Washington School for the Blind, which talks about making sure that we comply with the gender identity that the student asserts when they're at school. The California Schools for the Deaf and the Blind also have general non-discrimination policies. The California School for the Blind specifically states, again, that you should use the gender identity that the student asserts at school. Other state schools have general non-discrimination policies specifically regarding transgender and sexual orientation, but those are for staff, not for students.
Thank you. Either the California or the Washington regulations, are they influenced by different legal statutory regimes in those respective states?
Yes, so California, I know for certain, is influenced by state law. I am not certain on the Washington policies, but I can certainly look into that, and I'd be happy to report back to the board and see what the underpinnings are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, action item for approval of a donation from Consultant Engineering in the amount of $500 designated to the ASDB Museum in memory of Elwyn Slade. Does anybody know anything about Elwyn Slade? Polly probably does. Okay. Can you tell us just a couple of things about Elwyn?
Hello, Board President and Board members, Superintendent Annette Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Rex, and friends of ASDB. I am Polly Brady Garcia. I am the ASDB Museum Curator. I have known Elwyn Slade for quite a long time. He was a student in 1936. He recently passed away in June, or I believe it was in May. Elwyn Slade was a former employee of ASDB. He worked as a printer. He also moved to work in for a gas company locally, and from there he married Alice Soto, who is now Alice Slade, who was also a former employee of ASDB. They were actual childhood sweethearts. They graduated ASDB and became husband and wife. So Elwyn Slade, we'd like to recognize him at our museum during our October 14th celebration. And I can tell you a little bit more about our October 14th celebration. Elwyn Slade was such a tremendous worker as a printer, the instructor, and a dorm supervisor. He also worked in other capacities. I've known him since I was a child. I've known him for so many years. He was such a hard-working man, so I'd like to recognize him.
Ms.
Thank you.
Garcia, can you go ahead and stay? You can go ahead and do your comments on a non-agendized items that you wanted to give. You submitted 2 slips, so go ahead and give those to me.
Yes, absolutely. So if you don't mind, I would like to speak briefly about our October 14th event. The other topic I'd like to bring up is building an archive. So it would be about a 3-minute discussion. Would that be okay, President?
Yes, please.
So on the topic of October 14th, I have volunteered my time and efforts to prepare a celebratory event for both PDSD and ASDB. PDSD will be celebrating their 50th anniversary, and ASDB will be celebrating 105 years. So I have requested from PDSD to combine our efforts in celebrating our momentous events. It is not an alumni-specific event. I have spent most of my time, because I know a lot of the history as a curator of ASDB. So October 14th, we are celebrating here on Tucson campus, ASDB. In the morning, it begins at 10 a.m. till 4:30 in the afternoon. There will be a museum display and tour, a landmark display, where we will have actual signposts throughout campus indicating each of the different buildings and the history behind the buildings, what years they were built, and where that famous skeleton, the remains were found, all the different topics within ASDB. And at the gymnasium, we will have about 3,000 photos displayed in the gymnasium commemorating our history. And unfortunately, PDSD and ASDB, they have their week-long break, so the students will not be on campus, but I do plan on having a celebration on October 14th that is open to the public, so if those are here on campus can come. On Monday, the students, when they return, they will have the opportunity to come through and look at the different photos that will still be held in the gymnasium. After that tour, I will repack everything, put everything back to the museum, and also to PDSD. They will have their own special commemoration event. So I am still discussing the plans with the PDSD principal and their committee to decide when to have this special event and demonstration. So I encourage the board and legislative members and the governor possibly, and any friends of ASDB to come visit PDSD because it will be there and there's a lot of history about the school there. So I definitely want to bring legislatures to come out and actually see what a fantastic agency we are, and we definitely need their support. And I do have a flyer here for you if you are interested. And now speaking about the archives, I know that the school system is a very interesting system. Sometimes we forget, we overlook the preservation of our historical items. Some things have been stolen, some things haven't been returned. So I started thinking about maybe as the ASDB museum curator, noticing the crowding of items, maybe we can have a new archive location, maybe an actual building that is separate from the museum, as to store so many of our pictures, our items, and I would hate for something to be lost or just put away in a closet. So the reason we established this museum, I apologize, the reason I was interested in establishing an archive was again to preserve our history, our campuses. Many students that attend a school for the deaf or the blind don't have archives. We could be the premier in the schools for the deaf or blind. Gallaudet has an archive, but they have no museum. So we do have museums throughout the country, but we would be the very first to have a museum and an archive. So I'm asking for the board's support in creating an archive on possibly in collaboration with the University of Arizona. They do send students to our campus to become teachers. Or maybe we can work with them collaboratively on how we can build this archive. So I know our superintendent has tons of books in her library about deafness and deaf studies and blind, visually impaired studies. So I think it'd be such a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with the University of Arizona in our history, and they can volunteer their time. So killing two birds with one stone. And as we start building these archives, maybe they will eventually want to become employees of ASDB, and I can then train them to become storytellers or stalkers or some sort of work for them within the archives. Again, as we know, archives are the best place to preserve history, and ASDB has such rich history, and to have to chase people and chase different departments for photos or different collectibles, I would hate for them to be stored away and collecting dust. Again, there's tons of old pictures that I have yet to see or I've just encountered, and former teachers may walk away with something that's valuable, and I think it's time for us to actually keep it in one place and know that it's centralized. I think it's also important to have an actual site where people can visit and employ people. So So, and maybe there's things in the library or in media or different departments within. Security can also monitor this facility to make sure that we are preserving all this information in a safe place. And IT can even come to become innovative, create passwords to even enter these archives. So I know sometimes I can't even open my computer because I need a password. So if we create an archive that is restricted to those that have access, and maybe if I don't have access to it, someone would with the password. Media department can take digital photos and can put it in a video display for the visually impaired, and we can also, have a specific department. I think our school can expand if we have this idea of an archive. So this is the reason I asked the support of the board to please consider establishing an archive for the ASDB in our agency. And I know, even our state has the museum library, the archives, so this just thought, hey, why not here? I think we can have one location where everyone can visit, because I'm running out of space in the museum, so we'd be the premier school, and everyone has museums, but no one has an archive. So hopefully someday we will be able to work together and actually come up with a great idea. And all we need is maybe, I'm thinking a 30 by 30 building, something with maybe 900 square feet, something less than $200,000 could work. The state, I think, would definitely want to work with us because we are the state school. So thanks again for allowing me this opportunity to present.
Thank you. Okay. Call for agenda items for the next meeting.
No, we need to action on 6.06.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. We need to approve the donation. You're right. A motion to approve 6.06.
I so move.
Do we have a second?
This is Lynn, a second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, it approves. Thank you. So next is call for agenda items for the next meeting. Are there any agenda items that any board members would like covered? Okay, so I actually think that we should have a telephonic board meeting sometime in August to discuss these financial issues, so we can have move this process along. So I'm going to ask Leticia to send a poll out to the board members. There are obviously there needs to be some time for Mike and Richard to work to get it together, but see if the board, the 10th, 17th, or 24th, those are the Thursdays in August, and see if one of them works for a telephonic review of the financial numbers. And then we could also have, if you want, discussion of the funding for the travel. What I'd ask is, of that list that we just consented to, some sort of distribution of how much money would come from the trust funds to fund those trips. So when you look at the document, it indicates that it's going to be parent funding, school funding, and some of them say trust fund funding, but it doesn't actually specify not to exceed or something of that nature.
We have a meeting on July 17th for the trust fund committee, so
Okay.
we can help put that
All right,
together.
great.
Thank you.
So we can, because then you'll have it approved before the school year if you put it on the agenda for that meeting. And then the other thing is I believe, so we have a board meeting in September. I know I'm asking a lot, but we're going to have a retreat after that meeting. Okay, another retreat. I just think the discussions that people got to have that were very fruitful, and if we're going to talk about board role and things, we're going to need to put some time where people can be in a room and talk about board role. And we actually had somebody who volunteered to help lead that discussion. Any other comments?
Would it be helpful if I approached outside organizations to see about getting a more formal training for that retreat?
Sure, I would, that with Superintendent Reichman, and she might use Nancy Alexander, who's been a facilitator for the board. She's a retired superintendent who does development. So, and she's helped us with our superintendent search. She's interacted with the board a lot, so whatever resources you need, so.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, the best item on the agenda, item 8.01, adjournment.
This is Lynn. I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I second.
Sue K, second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Thank you, everybody, for your time. Enjoy the summer and keep cool.